when you've got all these people around you saying, man, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you got so much potential, they're basing that on what they see and what they have seen and what they have experienced in their little circle, their little community.
And knowing full well they're not going to have to do the work. Welcome to the second Plan A podcast, where we take hard-earned lessons from the maths and convert them into tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I am Ryan Hoover, and expectations are like plans. You better be prepared for them to change.
Ooh, solid connection. So today we are moving on to our second Plan A. On the note of second Plan A, our first episode was this same topic with similar notes and everything, and I'm sure it's going to go different than the first time we did it, but this is our second Plan A on this one.
I hope it goes different than the first time we did it.
We've learned a lot. Ryan's learned a lot, so he's ready for this one.
Yeah.
On this episode, we are flexing our minds to discern the differences between those who can lift a car and those who think that seeing red will make it happen. Of course, we'll take this a step further than the weight room and talk about setting expectations as we pit ambition against practicality. Are you ready to get into it?
Yes.
I can see you're expecting everything. What? Okay. So let's start with that great E word, expectations. And I use the word great intentionally because, as many of our listeners probably know, you have quite the literary flair. And so we're going to talk about the novel Great Expectations. Super Cliff Notes summary version. This will get you an F in a literature class, but it will suffice for now. So in The Great Expectations, the protagonist, Pip, feels shameful about his social background and spends most of the novel desiring and striving to be a quote-unquote gentleman so that he can win over the love of a woman. Of course, women are motivating this. His kindness to a convict early on in the book turns out to be what gives him the opportunity to become a gentleman. But as he realizes this convict is also the father of a woman he's enamored with, and he ends up shedding his views on social status in order to be with the woman that he loves and reconcile this in his mind. And so in the end, he pays off his debts, he earns an honest living, and finds love. So, what can we learn from this book penned in the 1860s?
Obviously, it's been a very long time since I've read this, but and I think it's probably one of, if not Dickens' best. But it's, from what I remember, Pip was an orphan, and the book is kind of written almost in stages of life. Mm-hmm. It's based on this idea that Pip was pretty ambitious, and if he would see what he deemed as a failing or a shortcoming in himself, he would go really, really hard in that direction to try to improve on what the perceived shortcoming was, whether it was, something in his character or social status or wealth or whatever. And, there was an equation, which I think, happens often with, well, if I have a higher social status, more wealth, whatever, then that will make me a somehow better, more moral, more affectionate person.
And even happier.
Yeah. And, ultimately he finds out that that's not exactly the case, and I think what it shows for us, because it was written over 100 years ago, that human nature is just human nature. That same kind of progression in a person's life has probably been repeated countless numbers of times since then. Yeah. And we have this idea, this expectation of, well, if I do this, if I reach this, if I get to this point in my life, if I earn this much money, if I reach this job title, if I get into this social circle, whatever, then that's going to equate to these other things. And, we're looking at it from the perspective of thief is the comparison of joy, kind of like I have this expectation based on what I see of somebody's chapter 20, and I'm in my chapter 1,
right.
And I I don't have a good understanding of what it took them to get there, if anything. They may have been born into this class. And I mean, if you look at, the time that Great Expectations was set, we're talking about the Victorian era where people were literally born into, this social class that allowed them these kinds of benefits that Pip was
After.
seeking, and having to work for. But he was looking at it from the perspective of, I started as an orphan, and so he's in chapter 1. He's looking at somebody else's chapter 15, chapter 20, whatever. And you see this in social media all the time too, and I don't want to make this about social media again, but like most people are posting, they're posting their best aspects of their life, but also two, they're posting where they are now, and you're seeing them with this house, this car, this social status, whatever. You didn't see them 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so the expectation is, if I do this, then I will be happy. I will have this car. I will have this house. I will have this social circle to where now I can be the cool kid, person, blah, blah, whatever. And, it's just, I think the moral of Great Expectations is he became a good person, not because of his social status or wealth or whatever, but because he did the right things to be a good person.
Right. Well, and so it's tough because ambition can be a great word, and it can also be your downfall as well. And if you have this linear thinking of, I'm just going to do these things to get to this endpoint, and even if you stick really hard to it because you have that drive, that ambition, that desire, you might get to that endpoint still and not be satisfied, but you might not actually reach it, and your whole world comes crashing around you.
Right.
And it's one thing to be looking at something that takes maybe a month or two to progress through. Like, okay, well, if I can get to the point where I can do, 200 push-ups in a row, I'm going to be, as strong as I need to be to do jujitsu or
Right.
whatever you've kind of decided is your end point. And you get 2 months down the road and you can do your 200 push-ups, but you're still getting wrecked on the mats.
Yeah.
And so
your
now
jiu-jitsu still sucks.
Yeah.
You're just really good at push-ups.
Yeah. And you have to reframe that entire thought process and that entire goal and everything. But, in Pip's case, he was talking about his entire life goal.
Yeah.
And so if you think about somebody who starts in their 20s thinking, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to follow this path, and then I can get to this place, and 10, 15 years later, it's not working, but they can't switch their mindset.
Right.
They're going to be spinning their wheels.
Well, and a lot of times I think too, it's there's no shortage of people on Instagram, for example, that it's like, if you do these 6 things, you will be able to do this. You will be successful in this because
Right. Grow your Instagram following. Here's the 6 things to do.
Right. And so, and it may be, increase your net worth by $1 million. It might,
Sure.
It could be whatever.
Right. Yeah.
What I can tell you is, other than, maybe an arm bar from bottom, very few things happen in just 6 steps. And even that arm bar from bottom, those 6 steps are just designed to get you to learn the basic fundamentals of how to do an arm bar. It tells you nothing about actually how to set it up, how to see it materializing in real time, how to make micro adjustments as needed when the person doesn't do exactly what they were doing when you were drilling it. And so when you see this influencer say, well, do these 6 things and then you try it and it doesn't work for you, you start to think, well, what's wrong with me?
I'm too short. Yeah. Well, so let's stay on that armbar idea, because if you're rolling and your expectation is, hopefully your expectation isn't, I'm going to go to my back and do this thing, but we're going to stay with it for now. If your expectation is, okay, if I get here to this position, I'm going to hit an armbar, and you're trying and it's just not working, and they pull that arm out and you're like, no, I really want the armbar. I really want the armbar. You miss the triangle that's right there that gets set up for you. So if you're not aligning your true goals. If you don't have a true measure of what success is, you're going to miss the mark. And that was Pip. He thought he wanted a social status,
Right.
but he really wanted a good, happy life with, not even necessarily abundance, just paid off debts and love, and he could function in it. So he missed the point, which was established along the way. Be good, do good things, and you're going to get that life. Well, if your goal is to submit somebody in a match, you might really want that armbar.
Yeah.
But you have to be ready to shift your expectations based on what's available to you.
Right. Well, I mean, I taught a jiu-jitsu class last night, and I had this conversation with the class when it came time for rolling. I said, look, I want you to go into these roll rounds not with the goal of winning, but with the goal of improving.
Yeah.
If I only go into it with the goal of winning this match, this 4-minute round against this singular person, it's a very short-sighted way of looking at how, because I assume that you're there to actually get good at jiu-jitsu, right? If the goal is to get good at jiu-jitsu, then the goal in a rolling round should not be to win, because what does that really mean?
It says you beat one person one day, one time.
With the thing that I'm already good at, probably, the thing that I'm already comfortable with, the thing that I already know how to do really well. And so for me to improve, for me to get better at jiu-jitsu, and I'm using jiu-jitsu as an example, but I think this correlates to pretty much anything. I have to do things that I'm not necessarily all that good at. I have to try those things and figure out why they might work for me and why they might not. I already know, me personally, I already know that triangles work for me in a vast array of circumstances. So for me to get better at jiu-jitsu, I don't need to get better at triangles. I need to get better at jiu-jitsu, which means I need to try other things. I need to put myself in situations that I'm not necessarily all that comfortable in. I need to roll with people that I think are going to challenge me, whether it's their skill sets or their size or their physical attributes or whatever. And all of that is hard. It's hard to get there from a mindset standpoint, because you have to recognize and acknowledge I have shortcomings in these areas. So I need to work on these things. While I'm working on these things, I'm going to fail a lot. And that's a hard thing to come to grips with, especially in something like combat sports, where failing a lot means you're being physically dominated by another human,
Right. Well, so this calls to mind a quote from a Mark Manson article, where he says, achieving success in life is not nearly as important as our definition of success.
Yeah.
And he introduces the whole article with a satirical look essentially at Adolf Hitler, who, by certain definitions of success, was incredibly successful, but shouldn't be the type of success you're trying to emulate.
Right. Don't be Bryce Mitchell.
So, the way you define success should be based on your goals, which are improving in jiu-jitsu, not can I tap John?
Right.
Or whatever nearsighted singular mission that you get stuck on. And that myopic vision that we do end up getting stuck and focused on is where coaches come in to help pull you out of that.
Yeah.
I don't really care if you tap John today or whatever it is. I care that last week you kept pushing people off of you, extending your arms and getting arm barred. This week you kept your arms in, so you ended up getting hit with baseball bat chokes. But that's an improvement for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, and I do think coaches obviously play a big role here, just in the tone and tenor that you set in your class. I mean, again, the idea of me just having that conversation with my class before they got their first rolls in, I wanted to set my expectation for them, so then they could temper their own expectations. Because if they're going into a roll round, they may be going into a roll round looking to impress me for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, coach is watching, I'm going to smash everybody in the room. Well, I don't care about that.
Not going to impress me.
Like I have never in my life counted the number of taps that students have gotten in rolls. I've never done that ever. I never will do that because I don't care. What I care about seeing, one, the way you roll with somebody, I'm looking at that because it tells me a lot about who you are as just a human. It's like, the old, well, I am judging them based on how they treat the waiter, kind of thing.
Right.
You know, if you're an ass to the waiter, that's a pretty good indicator of who you are as just a person. And so when you roll and you're the bigger, stronger, more skilled person, whatever it is, and you're smashing this person that you know physically cannot hang with you or doesn't have the same skills as you or whatever, that's not impressive to me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
put yourself in bad situations with that person. Let them work a little bit. Force yourself to work out of bad places against people that don't have the same skills as you. That's way more impressive to me. And it's way more developmentally sound for you because you smashing that person doesn't help you at all. Doesn't help you, doesn't help them.
Yeah.
Nobody gets better from that.
Yeah. But in this, there's a quote, and I have the quote from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, but it's an idea that's pretty commonplace across, many realms of experience and life situations. But some people get 20 years of experience, while others get 1 year of experience 20 times in a row. And so when you're going into roles and you're thinking, okay, yeah, I got 6 rounds in. Well, did you? Or did you get 1 round 6 times because you just did
The same things over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I roll differently with everybody that I roll with in some form or fashion. If I'm rolling with somebody that I know is not going to murder me,
Yeah.
I might roll with my eyes closed. If I roll with somebody that I know is bigger and stronger than me, I might go into that roll round with the idea of, all right, I'm going to do everything I can to stay on top. Or I might do the opposite. I might say, all right, I'm going to see how bad it can get from me on bottom and then work my way out from that. And if I can't, then that's a lesson for me. But if I just go in and I'm like, all right, I got 6 rounds coming up, I'm going to triangle the shit out of everybody. Like, there's little expectation for, or there should be little expectation for improvement there.
Yeah.
If I touch hands and I turtle up and I automatically give somebody my back, well, now I'm putting myself in a situation where I'm going to have to work to survive, and come out on top. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, there's levels to this thing in terms of levels of understanding, which is going to kind of drive expectation. Like at some point, you have enough understanding in jiu-jitsu that you can catch and release, for example, right? You know you have the sub, whether the other person knows it or not should not matter to you.
Right.
But
ego, man.
Yes. And so if I get to the point where I can catch and release and just keep my rolls going, that's what I should do. I actually gave a demonstration last night. I grabbed Matt and we played for a second. Matt caught me in an arm bar. I tapped. We immediately just went right back to work. It wasn't,
you loosened up, you escaped and kept
yes.
going. Yeah.
There was no reset. There was no let's have a conversation about it. There was no touching hands, none of that stuff. I do think there's a time and place for that. But I think when and I don't want to make this about jiu-jitsu, but when your roll rounds are pretty limited, get the rolls in. And then afterwards, you can always talk to whoever and be like, all right, what was I doing that you felt or saw that allowed you to keep catching me in this, that, the other? Yeah. Don't take your time now to do that.
Right. Well, and on that note, don't take your time now. If I know I have a submission locked in and the person I'm trying to submit is being stubborn or doesn't,
right.
thinks that they have room and I know they don't, whatever it is,
just break it.
I could spend the next 20 seconds or whatever really making them miserable, bringing them to a point where it could be dangerous for them and their longevity in the sport, or I can just keep going. Yeah. Because
go harder and faster.
What value is that actually going to bring me? And it kind of comes back to the point of the gap in the gain, where how am I improving and how am I measuring where I am now compared to where I was? Taking that extra 20 seconds and making that person tap isn't going to bring you benefit. It's not going to improve. I want to be measuring and looking at how far I've gone rather than how far I still have to go. Right. Because that's going to help differentiate what I'm focusing on.
Well, and that comes down to I need to stop worrying about what other people think. Because if I know I have the sub, why do I need him to know it?
Yeah.
you know, like,
Sure.
and so the life lesson there is why do I care what other people think about where I am in my life, whether it's relationships, work,
Yeah.
whatever, who cares? Like
You won't find success that way.
no.
Or you will find success, but you'll still feel like a failure because there's always going to be someone talking about you saying that you're not there, or you're not, or
Yes.
thinks that they're better than you or whatever. And if you just go around trying to prove that to people,
Yeah.
you're never going to be happy.
Right.
Because again, you're just looking at the gap between where you want to be and where you are and where other people think you are.
Yeah. And I think we've probably said this in a previous episode, but like if it's not somebody I wouldn't take advice from, I'm not going to take criticism from them either.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
and that's not to say that there's not credible criticism out there. But if I don't know you and I don't know who you are and what you've done and what your experience level is, or I don't have some reason to respect the opinions that you're giving me, then I don't care what you have to say. And if you're judging where you are in life based on the feedback that you're getting on the internet from some video that you posted or whatever, you're going to have a hard life to live. And this took me a long time to get to that point. It is super rare that I will comment on one of our videos now, unless if it's a positive comment, I'll give them a quick thank you or whatever. But outside of that, if it's just this person is just being negative because they're a miserable human being, I'm not responding to that. Like, what's the point?
I've had in interviews on other podcasts where people ask how I handle negative comments, and I ignore them. I keep going. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't even think of any particular one because I don't give it any kind of weight or credence because I don't care.
If we're talking about expectations, what's your expectation for responding to that person?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden they're going to be like,
They're
oh,
just
yeah,
gonna-
you know
yeah.
what? You're right.
Yeah.
That almost never happens. Almost never.
Well, especially because for me, like if I think about being on the other side of it, if I'm convinced enough that I have decided to comment on this stranger's video,
Which again, I don't do that either. So
yeah, I don't really ever get to that point. But if I did, you're not going to change my mind in a back and forth comment battle.
Now, I will say, and we've talked about this before, sometimes if I think the argument itself has at least some peripheral, tangential, maybe rational thought process to it, I might respond in a way that if anybody else happens to be reading and following along, but I'm not trying to convince this person, because that just almost never happens.
So if we post a video about like hair grab defense and it's promoting bursting in on the pole and staying on your feet versus, I don't know, falling on your back to do an arm bar.
Yeah.
And somebody comments, no, you should fall on your back and do an arm bar.
Right.
There's a response to be made there so that when somebody reading sees that, they see your comment back to where you're putting yourself at increased risk. That's not even the direction they're pulling you kind of thing.
Yep.
And whatever it is so that you've stated your case and they'll respond with something for sure. But you've put what you needed so that somebody reading through, scrolling through sees why we feel and believe and know that this is the better response.
Yes. Because again, I've set my expectations. My expectations are not to try to convince this singular person, but to offer some guidance maybe to somebody that happens to be reading but has no real opinion one way or the other and is truly just looking for information.
Yeah. So we've leaned in heavily on the expectations side. And if you're setting expectations well, a lot of what you choose to focus on, your ambition, goes relatively well, of course, as all these things can. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about the idea of balancing ambition and practicality, because you might want to bench 300 pounds, but you get to the point at 220, 240 where you realize your body, your frame just does not support this. And without, drugs that you don't want to do or whatever it might be, that wasn't a realistic goal. So we do have to find practicality within that.
Yeah.
And I want to look at the 1984 Olympic Games to set the stage for this. LA. Yeah. So in 1976, Montreal had a huge loss hosting the Olympic Games. and no city wanted the 1984 games.
A monetary loss.
A monetary loss,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
So LA, the 1984 games, actually made it the first ever financially viable event. And that was even after the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow had a huge boycott.
Go America.
America. So anyway, Peter Uberoth is the one who had the thought that the Olympic Games could be profitable. Up until then, cities didn't want the Olympic Games.
Is he baseball commissioner?
He was, yeah. So he was responsible for the first ever Olympic event, showing a profit. And the Olympics are coming back to LA in 2028. But he was actively against a U.S. Olympic Committee board member, John Naber, not sure if I'm saying that right, Naber, who specifically said the message to bring to LA was that the Olympics are going to bring long hours, no pay, and guaranteed termination. Yeah, and he said bet, and ended up making a profit of over $200 million.
Yeah.
And that's in 1984.
Yeah.
That's huge.
So I can see how Neighbor would think that, because the precedence had been said that this is a loser when it comes to money.
Right.
You know, there's prestige or whatever that comes along with it, but monetarily, this is a loser. But it's like a lot of things. It becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go into it with the expectation of this thing is not going to make money, then guess what? This thing is not going to make money. And if you're somebody like Uberoth, who has a pretty good track record of running major events, major organizations, and you approach it from the standpoint of, look, this is Los Angeles. This is a major media market, you know, a major financial hub. California has a GDP bigger than a lot of countries, you know.
Yeah.
There's no reason that this thing can't make money unless we don't try to make money with it.
Right.
And so when you set that expectation right from jump, then you'll do the things that are required to actually make money. And then the flip side of that is true. You know, if you go into it saying, well, this thing's not going to make money, then you don't even try.
Yeah.
You know, why would you try?
Why would you
There's
try?
no reason to. You're saying, well, Montreal didn't, whoever before that didn't, nobody has made money on this thing. And if you don't even look at why they didn't make money, because did they try to make money with it?
Right.
You know, I don't know.
Or did they just assume because it was a loss, you're just going to have to accept that?
Right. And you know, some people probably looked at that like the 300-pound bench press. Dude, you're setting unrealistic expectations here. Right. You probably could have made a good argument for that. But that's where planning comes in. You know, that's where strategy comes in. That's where having vision comes in. That's where, you know, Darren Hardy's big, hairy, audacious goal setting kind of comes in. And I don't know if he had a number to meet or anything, but $200 million in 1984 is a ton of money.
It's a little over $600 million today. Yeah. So normal logic says that the reason for saying something must precede the statement. So it would make normal logical sense to say Olympic Games operate at a loss because in the past they have operated at a loss. Right. Or if you say something like turn off the stove, it necessitates that the stove is on.
Yeah.
So it's very linear. Provocation, as a term, is where there may not be a need for saying something until after it has been said. So Uberoth said, hosting the U.S. Olympic Games can make a profit. Yeah. He was able to break out of this linear thinking, this logical pattern, and by the time we got through the Olympic Games and he made the profit, when you circle back, you realize, oh, that did make sense. Mm-hmm. And so that's an idea, this lateral thinking, termed by Dr. Edward de Bono, who coined that term, where you can deviate from patterns and the logical linear logic that drives most humans and realize where something else would make sense. But it's against conventional thought processes because the brain wants to recognize patterns and follow what you expect and very linear logical thinking, right, quite literally to keep to the middle of the pack because that's the safest place for us. Again, very human primitive type thinking.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, let's say hindsight is 2020. Well, that's not entirely accurate. It's not that hindsight is 2020. It's you literally have something to look at, and Uberoth had a vision, You know, he was looking into the future and saying, this is what's possible. This is what can happen. This is how we can do it. It's easy after the fact to have been like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
you
of
know,
course that
he
works.
did this
Yeah.
and, you know, all he had to do was this.
But you don't know it's going to work until it works.
Right.
And
And
that's where people stand out.
yes. And that's another thing that, you know, people are like, well, you know, all he had to do was, or he just did this, or yeah, but it wasn't about, it's, here's a good example. I think it's a good example. You go to get, you know, your car serviced, whatever it is. And the part was $30, but you get charged, you know, 90. You're like, what the well, you're not, and it took the mechanic, you know, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, you're not paying for that 15 minutes. You're paying for the 15 years of experience that he has in knowing how to diagnose what's wrong with it and then fix it quickly.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
maybe you could have done it, but maybe it would have taken you 6 hours
Right.
to figure it out. So what is that time really worth?
And in the meantime, you broke two other things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the hitting the heater with a hammer kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the charge is like $10 for the 20 minutes, but you know, $100 for the 7 years to know where to hit with that hammer kind of thing, whatever it is.
So it's easy for you to say, well, I could have done that.
Yeah.
Well, then why didn't you do it?
Yeah.
You know, you could have done it now that somebody has shown you how it needs to be done.
Right.
That's not the hard part. The hard part is somebody setting an expectation and then having a vision for how to get there, you know, and that's what you pay for.
Yeah. That vision is, you know, that's something really worthwhile to see in other people and develop in yourself. It makes me think of the parable of the three bricklayers. Each bricklayer is asked, what are you doing? And the first one says, I'm laying bricks. The second one says, I'm building a church. And the third one says, I'm building the house of God. The first bricklayer has a job, the second has a career, and the third has a calling. Yeah. And they're doing the same thing on the same project at the same time, but the difference between a job, a career, and a calling lies in how you perceive the work. Yeah. And that has vision to it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things, you know?
Yeah, no.
And I think this is where, you know, you hear people say, well, if you like what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, which is a load of
That's
shit.
Not true.
Because the dude with the calling is working just as much or just as hard as the dude with the job.
Yep.
It's just that he sees it beyond me just putting bricks together. Yeah. You know, the end of this is going to be something that I value, that I am passionate about. I'm not passionate necessarily about laying the bricks.
Right.
I'm passionate about where that gets me, what that will then allow for my community, my society, what my circle, whatever. You know, the minutia of it is what it is. Yeah. But it's still work, you know. And in some cases, I think if it's something that you truly care about, it's more work.
Yeah.
You know, because it's hard to leave it.
Yeah.
You know, when it's just a job, you clock out at 5 o'clock and you leave it there until you pick it back up the next day. We don't ever clock out.
No.
You know, like that's just not a thing. And I'm not saying we have it tough or hard or anything like that. You know, I wouldn't trade this for bricklaying. But what I am saying is, I think the idea, because we're talking about expectations. If your expectation is that once you find your calling, you stop working, you are greatly misinformed, because that's just not how it works. Your expectation should be that once you find your calling, it will be your life. Almost all-consuming.
Yeah. Well, so it goes back to Grit, which I've referenced by Angela Duckworth, and she talks about the stages of grit. And so once you find that intrinsic motivation and that purpose, you get that true conviction. That's where you know the wheels stop turning and they don't stop turning, kind of thing. The first stage she defines as interest. You know, you start having a little bit of a passion, that intrinsic motivation, and enjoying what you do, and it's just, you know, an enjoyable thing. And then you start moving into practice where you get more of a regular devotion to it and you start really wanting to improve. And then is purpose. And that's where you turn that interest into your conviction, which is often referred to as finding your why. And we've talked about this on the podcast as well. Once you find your why and realize how big this thing matters to you and to others, it's a bigger motivator than just, well, I'm doing this to do it, or I'm doing this because it gives me a paycheck.
Yeah.
And then the last stage, she's
Sort of.
well,
Sometimes.
ideally, the last stage she says is hope, the rising to the occasion type of perseverance, which really isn't the last stage, but defines every stage. And so, you get knocked down, but you keep going because you have this new level of motivation and purpose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like along those lines, if it's a job, and again, I'm not speaking, but I just move on to the next thing. Like if I don't like what's happening here, I don't like what's going on, I don't like the people I work with, whatever, fine, I quit and I go do another job.
And there are phases of your life where that's what it is.
Yeah. But when it's your calling, your purpose, your thing, that is not easy to do. I don't know that it's even, I don't want to say it's impossible, but even if you physically can walk away from it, I'm not sure that you ever mentally, emotionally leave it, So the idea of, well, I'm going to go do this other thing, I think probably is a good indicator that you haven't found that calling, that purpose yet. Because it shouldn't be that easy to just walk away from it.
Which is funny because people use that term, finding my purpose.
Yeah.
And there is, a process of literally finding it, but it's not like once you know kind of thing. You don't really have to dig. You're going to know what you enjoy, and what's worth the suck of the other things, because you're not going to enjoy every aspect of it.
Right.
Charles Dickens from Great Expectations has a quote: "Take nothing on its looks, take everything on evidence. There is no better rule." And it's this leaning into, what am I experiencing? What do I feel? What do I know? Rather than just, people say that this is going to be a great job or that this is a great thing, whatever it might be.
Yeah. There's probably some good political lessons in that quote, because it's easy to get caught up in the emotion of how something makes me feel on the surface versus what the actual evidence is, And I think as humans, we're mostly driven by emotion. We're mostly driven by how something makes us feel. The idea that we're motivated by pain or pleasure, and not necessarily by facts and evidence. And that's when we feel a certain way. When something makes us feel good or makes us feel bad, it's easy to ignore what the facts are, and so we've talked about having, good people around us in communities and communication lines where people can kind of pull us out of that a little bit, because if our expectation is, well, this makes me feel good, so it must be good, or this makes me feel bad, so it must be bad, it is probably some flawed thinking that is not always easy to just walk away from,
Having that self-reflection to know, like, I don't know enough to know, type of thing. And that's hard to get over. And that's literally what we're talking about here is balancing your expectations, setting your realistic expectations so that you can balance what you're seeing with what you should realistically expect, while still being able to be ambitious.
Yeah. I mean, like most things, something to an extreme can be a problem. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, having ambition, having a drive to reach a thing, a goal, whatever, is good. But if we take it to an extreme, then sometimes we either set unrealistic expectations or we ignore changing situations on the ground, because I've got this ambition, I've got this goal, I've got this expectation, and now I've got blinders on and I'm ignoring all the things that are going on around me that are telling me maybe I need to slow down, or maybe I need to change, directions, or maybe I need to involve somebody else, or whatever it is. Ambition can be blinding. Blind ambition, people,
Right.
it's a thing.
We've been watching a lot of Chopped lately. We're going to give you guys a rest from Love is Blind because Love is bland this season. But otherwise, we've been
Yeah, you
watching...
people in Minneapolis, Minnesota are boring. Holy crap.
Oh, well, all right, there goes that market. Anyway, we've been watching a lot of Chopped, and, they have 20 or 30 minutes to create a recipe, a full meal or appetizer or dessert out of these mystery ingredients in a basket. And they come in with their own ideas for some recipes and stuff, and then they have to think on their feet based on what's presented. And after the show, they have to do this interview that gets cut in between the rounds. Mm-hmm. And so you're watching them put a pastry in the oven, and in their post-show interview, they're saying, I recognized at that moment that I didn't have enough time, that it wasn't going to cook in time, mm-hmm. but I just put it in and hope for the best.
Yeah.
They recognized that their expectation was not going to pan out, but they still couldn't break from that path.
Right. Because they open the basket and they see the ingredients, and their immediate thought is, I'm going to do a puff pastry. 30 minutes be damned. That's what I'm going to do. And your rational thought process, your rational brain is telling you, you don't have enough time. Like you cannot make the oven cook faster. You can't just turn up the temperature. Like that doesn't work. There's a great scene in My Cousin Vinny, Joe Pesci, Marissa Tomei, Ralph Macchio. It's, oh my God, it's so funny.
I don't have time to keep up with all of his shows.
So it's a movie.
Oh,
it's a classic.
Yeah,
you're totally showing your. Oh,
I see all.
Oh my God. Anyway, one of the Joe Pesci is a lawyer. He's from New York. He's down representing his, I think, nephew somewhere deep south, Alabama, maybe, I don't remember. And at one point, they're trying to establish a timeline of when this murder kind of happened. And one of the witnesses is talking about he's cooking grits. And the timeline for what it takes to actually cook grits doesn't match up with the timeline that he is saying this thing occurred in. And Joe Pesci is like, so you're telling me that the laws of physics don't apply in your kitchen, that you're able to cook grits faster than everybody else on the planet. And, I think that once you set, especially when you're under stress, you're under pressure, you have adrenal dumps, you have elevated heart rates. The first thing that pops into your mind, it is very difficult to let go of, Yeah. And facts and evidence be damned. That puff pastry will not cook in time. I'm telling you now.
Stop doing it.
And your panna cotta is not going to set.
So, true.
Just saying.
I know. Why don't they learn?
I don't know.
Another Dr. Edward de Bono quote, the originator of the term lateral thinking, he said, unhappiness is best defined as the difference between our talents and our expectations.
Yeah, that's good.
So a big bite to chew on, because I'm sure it works both ways.
Yeah.
You have extraordinary talents, but you're not meeting what you think you can do with them.
Yeah.
Or if, you have these lofty expectations, but your talents aren't up to that par,
Yeah. Well, that's one of my least favorite words ever is potential.
I knew you were going to go there. Yeah.
and so I think a lot of people fall victim to that do have a lot of talent, and they've got everybody around them telling them, man, you have so much potential. You could be doing this and this and this and this. And those people are putting their expectations onto you based solely on whatever attribute it is that they recognize in you, without understanding the holistic kind of dynamic that is required to reach whatever this expectation or goal is that they have set. Being a great basketball player, for example, isn't just about having, a tremendous vertical jump and a good follow through on your jump shot. There's so much more that goes into it. And even if that is what's gotten you to a certain point, there's levels to this stuff. What made you a superstar in middle school and high school and maybe even in college might make you mediocre or below average in the NBA, and when you've got all these people around you saying, man, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you got so much potential, they're basing that on what they see and what they have seen and what they have experienced in their little circle, their little community.
And knowing full well they're not going to have to do the work.
Right.
It's so easy to want something for someone else. Right. And we talk about this usually in the mental health space in terms of quitting smoking, quitting drinking, getting help for depression, whatever it might be. It's very easy to want it for somebody else.
Yeah.
But they have to want it for themselves.
Yes.
So in that, the potential someone sees in you might be one thing, but what you're going to do with it is a whole other.
Right. It's such a stupid word. I hate it.
Okay, so
I hate that word.
I understand. And I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna bring it all together with a good quote that avoids that pesky word of potential and looks at something a little bit better.
Okay.
And you'll appreciate this quote. Everyone fails at...
Wait, is your expectation that I'm going to appreciate this quote?
Yes, and it's based on past experiences of you appreciating this quote.
Okay.
Everyone...
So you know that I'm going to.
Yes.
You already know
okay,
this.
That. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everyone fails at who they are supposed to be. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are. And that's from Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
Thor's mom. Because moms.
Yeah. No, it's a sound quote.
It's a pretty great quote. And as somebody who puts high expectations on myself, reminding me to come true to who I am and be who I am is an important thing. And as soon as that quote was said, I was searching it and saving it to my phone, and I was like, I need that.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah.
I knew you'd enjoy it.
Yep, it was good.
All right. That's our look at setting realistic expectations, balancing ambition with practicality. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave us 5 stars, follow, share, subscribe with the bell icon on Spotify and on YouTube, and join the conversation on social media. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, overreact, comment on everything we've ever posted. Tell us how we should be doing it and what our potential is.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Please tell us what we should be doing.
Always great.
Please do that.
Thanks for listening to Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
What she said. Thanks, everybody.